In 1982, Northrop Corporation finished building a fighter jet that nobody asked them to build, with their own money, on their own timeline, at their own risk. They spent approximately $1.2 billion of private capital developing an aircraft that met every performance requirement the United States government had ever publicly stated it wanted in an export fighter. It was faster, cheaper to operate, easier to maintain, and more combat capable than the aircraft it was designed to replace. It could be scrambled to combat readiness in 22 seconds. It had a radar that could track targets 50 miles out. Its thrust-to-weight ratio exceeded 1.1 at combat weight, meaning it could accelerate straight up. Not one government on Earth ordered it. The F-20 Tigershark didn't fail. That's the part that needs to be established right at the start, because the story gets told sometimes as a cautionary tale about a company that misjudged the market. That's not what happened. What happened was that Northrop built exactly the aircraft the system said it wanted, and then the system changed the rules, strangled the sales process, funded a competitor it had previously said it wouldn't fund, and on October 31st, 1986, Halloween, which is either a coincidence or the universe having a sense of humor, officially canceled the program. $1,200,000,000, 3 prototypes, 2 fatal crashes that were used against the aircraft in ways the data doesn't support, 0 production orders. Here's what that actually looks like when you follow it decision by decision. To understand the Tigershark, you have to understand what it was built to replace. The F-5 Freedom Fighter and its successor, the F-5E Tiger II, was America's export fighter of choice through the 1960s and 70s. Lightweight, simple, affordable. Not the most capable aircraft in anyone's inventory, but the kind of machine that a country without massive defense infrastructure could actually operate, maintain, and afford in numbers. Dozens of nations flew it. It was the right aircraft for the right market. By the late 1970s, the F-5E was aging, and the Carter administration had established what was called the FX policy, fighter export, which was designed to create a new lightweight export fighter that allied nations could purchase. The policy set specific parameters: affordable, capable, supportable. Nothing so advanced it raised proliferation concerns. Nothing so limited it was useless. A specific box of requirements publicly stated. Northrop read that policy and bet their company on it. Not metaphorically, literally. The Tigershark was funded entirely with private Northrop capital. No government development contract, no guaranteed purchase, just a company deciding that it could build the right aircraft and the market would follow. Which, right, is how private enterprise is supposed to work. Build the better product, win the customers. That's the deal. What Northrop built around the General Electric F404 engine, the same power plant that would later go into the F-A-18 Hornet, was genuinely extraordinary. The F404 gave the Tigershark a thrust-to-weight ratio of 1.13 at combat weight. For context, a ratio above 1.0 means the aircraft can accelerate vertically. The F-16 Fighting Falcon, which was the Tigershark's primary competitor for export contracts, had a comparable ratio. But the F-16 was a significantly more expensive aircraft to purchase and substantially more demanding to maintain. The Tigershark required 52% less maintenance man-hours per flight hour than the F-16. That number matters enormously for a smaller Air Force. Fewer maintenance personnel means lower operating costs, higher availability, more aircraft in the air more often. The engineering was optimized specifically for the customer the FX policy described. And then the policy changed. Here's the thing about the Reagan administration's arrival in 1981. It changed the calculus of American arms export policy in ways that were not immediately obvious from the outside, but were immediately catastrophic for the Tigershark program. The Carter FX policy had deliberately constrained what could be exported, the logic being that proliferating top-tier American fighters created security risks. Reagan reversed this. The new doctrine was that allied nations should have access to fully capable American fighters, which in practice meant the F-16. The aircraft that Northrop had specifically designed to be the affordable alternative to the F-16 was now competing against the F-16 with the full institutional weight of the United States government behind it. So look, this is the part where it starts to become genuinely difficult to characterize as anything other than a structural betrayal. Northrop had built the Tigershark inside the rules as they existed. The rules changed. And the change didn't just level the playing field, it tilted it in a direction that made the game nearly unwinnable. The State Department review process for export approvals became the operational mechanism for this. Every country Northrop approached to sell the F-20 required State Department approval. Every brochure, every sales visit, every proposal, subject to government review in a process that could take months. General Dynamics, selling the F-16 as a government-to-government sale with American institutional support, was already on planes closing deals while Northrop was waiting for paperwork. That's not competition. That's a bureaucratic chokehold on a private investment. The congressional record from this period is, if you read it carefully, remarkably candid about what was happening. During a hearing in the early 1980s, a general was asked directly why the Air Force was not actively marketing the F-20 to allied nations, given that it had been designed to government-stated specifications and met all of them. The answer, paraphrased from the record, was essentially, the Air Force's job was to support government-to-government sales, and the government's preference was the F-16, which, and I cannot stress how deliberate this was, means the Air Force was publicly acknowledging that it had a preferred outcome. And the preferred outcome was not the aircraft a private company had spent $1.2 billion building in good faith to their requirements. And then there was Israel. The Lavi program, Israel Aircraft Industries' domestically developed fighter, funded substantially with American foreign military financing, was in the early 1980s a direct competitor to the F-20 for exactly the export market the Tigershark was designed to serve. America was funding, through foreign aid, the development of a competitor to a private American aircraft program. Not directly, not with that stated intent, but the effect was the same. American dollars flowing to Israel, developing an aircraft that competed for the same customers Northrop was trying to reach. Seriously, $1.2 billion in private Northrop capital. American government money funding a competitor, the same government that had written the requirements Northrop built the aircraft to meet. The Lavi was eventually canceled in 1987, partly because the costs had spiraled, partly because American pressure to protect F-16 sales became too significant to ignore. But the cancellation came too late to change anything for the Tigershark. The doors had already been closing for years. If you're not furious yet, stick around, because the next part is where the crashes happen, and what was done with them is genuinely unbelievable. The F-20 had 2 fatal crashes during its demonstration period. Both need to be examined with precision, because both were used to damage the program in ways the data doesn't actually support. The first crash occurred in October 1984 at Suwon Air Base in South Korea. The Tigershark was performing a demonstration flight for Korean officials. A customer Northrop was actively courting. Daryl Cornell, a highly experienced Northrop test pilot, entered a high-G maneuver during the demonstration and did not recover. The cause was determined to be G-lock, G-induced loss of consciousness. At sustained high G forces, blood drains from the brain faster than the body can compensate, and the pilot loses consciousness without warning. It is not unique to the F-20. It is a known physiological risk in any high-performance aircraft performing aggressive maneuvers. The F-16 had G-lock incidents. The FA-18 had G-lock incidents. The condition was a known challenge across the generation. The second crash happened in May 1985 in Goose Bay, Canada. David Barnes, another experienced pilot, was performing a demonstration. Again, a high G profile. Again, a failure to recover. 2 crashes in demonstration conditions, both G-low-C related, in an aircraft with otherwise an extremely clean test record. Here's what actually makes me furious about this. The crashes were used in competitor briefings and in certain government assessments as evidence that the F-20 had a safety problem. Not G-low-C as a category challenge, not high-G demonstration profiles as a risk factor. The F-20 specifically as problematic. The aircraft that killed those pilots was not a defective design. It was a high-performance machine being flown at the edge of its envelope for potential customers, by pilots doing exactly what demonstration pilots do. The same maneuvers in the same conditions have produced the same outcome in every high-performance fighter in the inventory. But the crashes arrived at the worst possible moment. while Northrop was trying to close deals that the institutional environment was already making nearly impossible, and they were used accordingly. Before we get to the ending, drop a comment. What do you think actually killed the Tigershark? Politics, bad timing, or something worse? By late 1986, the last real opportunity for the F-20 was the Air National Guard competition. The Guard needed a new fighter. The F-20 was cheaper to purchase than the F-16. It was cheaper to operate. It met the performance requirements. This was the contract that Northrop had been building toward, a domestic American order that would validate the aircraft commercially, demonstrate Air Force endorsement, and unlock the export market that the State Department process had kept largely closed. The Air National Guard chose the F-16. The announcement came on October 31st, 1986, Halloween. The official reasoning cited capability and standardization. The Guard flying the same type as active-duty Air Force units simplifies logistics, training, and parts supply. That's a real consideration. It's a legitimate argument. But here's the context that surrounds that legitimate argument. The F-16 was a government program, with government infrastructure, with Air Force institutional investment, and with a manufacturer, General Dynamics, that had the full weight of the American defense procurement apparatus behind it. The F-20 was a private investment that had been navigating a State Department bottleneck, competing against government-funded alternatives, and absorbing the PR damage of 2 crashes in conditions that should have been assessed at the category level. The program was canceled the same day, not wound down, canceled. $1.2 billion in private capital, and the market it was built for had been effectively closed by the institution that wrote the requirements in the first place. 3 F-20 prototypes exist. One is at the National Air and Space Museum's Udvar Hazy Center. One is at the California Science Center. One is at the Air Force Museum in Dayton. None of them ever flew in operational service. Here's what the Tigershark story actually proves. Not about the aircraft, but about the system. Private investment in defense development, absent government commitment at the procurement stage, is essentially a bet against the house. Northrop did everything the policy said to do. They built the aircraft the requirements described. They funded it privately to demonstrate confidence. They operated in the export market the government had identified as the target. And at every stage where institutional support would have changed the outcome, the State Department review process, the government-to-government sales framework, the Air National Guard competition, the weight of the system was somewhere else. The tragedy isn't just Northrop's. The countries that would have bought the F-20, smaller air forces that needed a capable, affordable, maintainable fighter, ended up either flying aging F-5s longer than they should have, or stretching budgets to afford F-16s, or buying aircraft from other suppliers. The policy that was supposed to serve them produced an outcome that largely didn't. And here's the part that echoes into every defense acquisition conversation that came after. The F-35 program, which went $165 billion over its original cost estimate and years past its original schedule, was never canceled. The aircraft that was too expensive, too delayed, and too complex received continuous institutional support. The aircraft that was on time, on budget, and performing as specified, the one a company built with their own money because they believed in the policy, was canceled on Halloween. The F-20 Tigershark was not a failure of engineering. It was not a failure of investment or will or capability. It was proof that in defense acquisition, merit is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient one. The system doesn't always reward the right answer. Sometimes it buries it, sends it to a museum, and funds the alternative. And somehow, that's not even the strangest story in the history of American fighter procurement. Which is why there's another video.